Chapter 20 is called The Resurrection, Transformation and Power. And if you thought the cross was superabundant, you ain't seen nothing yet. The way in which the resurrection blows the lid off reality and the possibilities of reality and the hopefulness that can be held onto in the midst of reality. And the sense of who we are in the universe and the sense of who God is in the universe and 1,000 things besides is just thrilling. And I tried to put as much of that as I was humanly able into this chapter. I remember there's one passage from C.S. Lewis that was just so insightful. I can't even remember what he said, but I put it in the chapter. And it was about how the resurrection just reorders all of our sense of what life is and the limits of life and blows those limits away. And so among the different ways in which I try and cash this out in the chapter, I just want to talk about one. Again, it's not the main point of the chapter, but I haven't done much about literary culture in these videos. And so I want to hit this note in particular because I think the Bible has a lot to speak into particular cultural domains, if you like, and one of them is literature. So I've got this section in the chapter called Resurrection, Tragedy and Comedy, where I try and reflect on the resurrection in the light of the way in which drama has traditionally been categorized into these two fundamental categories, at least ancient drama. There's tragedy, which is ultimately hopeless and should issue, Aristotle says, in a catharsis of pity and fear. And there's comedy, which usually classically ends in a marriage and everything ends up well. And is the story of the cross and resurrection a comedy? Is it a tragedy or is it something else? And it's been called both, I think. And I run in the chapter through some of the ways in which people have figured it as a tragedy and some of the ways in which people have figured it as a comedy. But I try and make the argument that neither of those categories captures the subtlety and the subversive power of this story, this true story of the cross and resurrection. And I use a couple of different ways of trying to get a handle on that. One of them is that lovely term of J.R.R. Tolkien's, the eucatastrophe, the happy catastrophe, as a way that he has of trying to name this shape of story that the cross and resurrection gives us that's not a tragedy and it's not a comedy. And the reason that this is more than simply a literary critical debate is that we live life through stories, don't we? Again, either implicitly or explicitly. And we all assume a certain shape to the story of our lives by default. And we take that shape from the cultural stories that are available to us. A lot of people live their lives by the shape of an emancipation narrative. My aim, my meaning in life is to become liberated from whatever's oppressing me. Some people will see their lives as a tragedy, been so bruised and battered and knocked around by life that this can only end badly. And that shapes one's attitudes. And if a society begins to see itself in the light of a particular story as well, then that will shape the way that society engages with other societies and all sorts of consequences. So these stories are really, really existentially important. They're not just, for students of Shakespeare. And therefore the fact that the cross and resurrection rhythms reality and patterns reality in a way that's distinctive from both tragedy and comedy as they're usually figured in the Western tradition is foundationally important, I think, for Christian cultural critique. And this chapter just begins to scratch the surface of what that might mean for the way that Christians engage with culture.